Welcome to Soundbreaker. In today's episode, we're talking to Shannon Herber, who is a music industry executive with over 20 years in experience or of experience, and currently the founder and chief consultant at Wise River Consulting. Shannon, thank you for joining us today. And for
Thank
our
you, Bo.
listeners, my pleasure. And for our listeners who might not be familiar with you, would you please introduce yourself and before we dive into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on Soundbreaker. As you mentioned, my name is Shannon Herber. I've been in the music industry here in the US for over 20 years now. And I started as a publicist in the catalog department at Universal. I moved out to LA, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, 22 years old. Just wanted to be in the music industry, and I got lucky enough to be working with a friend and going to school, getting my grad degree at USC with a friend who was an intern at Universal. And she had said, hey, we're looking for more interns. Do you want to join? And I did. And so that is kind of what got me started. So from that internship, I got a job at Universal, and I ended up being manager of publicity and artist relations at Universal Music Enterprises, which is their catalog department. Did that for many years, loved it, absolutely loved it. But then I, just got the bug that I wanted to work with artists directly. So I started to work for Ana Kournikova and Enrique Iglesias, and then I had done some, awards production stuff in LA,
Great.
so I started working with shows, and so then I was the production manager for Cat Stevens. Started being a tour manager, toured with Moby for many years. And then once I, realized that the road was not, the most friendly place for long-term living, I moved over to the Grammys. And so I started as the production manager for the Los Angeles chapter for the Grammys. Then I moved over to being their head of pop and dance electronic awards. And so I ran those categories for a few years. And then that's how I met Steve Aoki's manager. And then he said, hey, we're starting this Web3 fan engagement company. Would you want to come over and run it? And I said, sure, I love a new challenge. So up until earlier this year, I was the managing director of Aokiverse. And so now I run my own music and tech consulting company, and I also do live event production. So kind of have a hand in both worlds now.
Amazing. Well, Stephen Aoki, speaking of Steve Aoki, he is one of the top or most successful performers out there, DJ, producer, an entrepreneur, many different titles, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. Well, let's go back a bit to Universal Music Enterprise, working at the catalog department. That must have been extremely interesting and intriguing, and I would say insightful to work there, learn about how massive is the catalog and certain things that you came across and learn. What would I say? My thing is, what would be, I would say, the key takeaways that you learn while working with artists at Universal Music Enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great education for sure, especially being someone, it was my first real job in the music industry. And I super loved it. And part of it was, it was the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. And so, the bands that were popular at the time were things like My Chemical Romance, right? We were going through the emo rock period, Paramore, folks like that. And while I do love that music, I was always listening to 60s and 70s music. One of my favorite bands is U2. Mm-hmm. Another one of my favorite bands is the Beatles. My first concert ever was the Rolling Stones. So, catalog and things that had a history and artists that have, kind of been successful and either maintained their success or maybe have gone on a little bit of a journey, right? So I love working with those folks because they have so much to teach you in terms of not just how to work with an artist, but how to work with an artist that has longevity, how to look at, working with fans, how to look at the ups and downs of it from a personal perspective in terms of how do you handle success at the beginning, and then how do you handle the emotional effects when you maybe don't have it to the level that you're used to. And so a lot of those artists are much more sanguine about sort of, what the industry looks like versus what making an album is or the art of it. Right. So correct. I work with, I worked with Lisa Loeb and Def Leppard, and we did the Motown catalog. So I got to go on the road with the Temptations. And so, it was those kinds of things where it was like, I grew up listening to Motown, and then I get to go on the road with the Amazing. Temptations. Yes. And they're really teaching you about life, So I think, to kind of answer your question, the key takeaways there were really getting just a top level education about how to work with artists, how to put out a record, how to think about your career from a long-term success standpoint, and how not to get caught up in a lot of the ego of it and remember why you started doing it in the first place.
I mean, the most interesting part, I would say, I'm going to call it like you graduate. Once you graduated from Universal, working with all these major artists, you're pretty much seasoned and prepared to open your own management company right out the gate.
I know a lot of people have asked that. For sure. They're like, why aren't you going to management? And I'm like, I don't want the phone call at 3 a.m.
Well, listen, you went on tours with certain artists. Who would you think your favorite or you enjoyed the most? Kind of, I mean, kind of I don't want you to take favorites, but hey,
Sure.
I really, one of the artists that I really enjoyed traveling with was so-and-so.
Oh, goodness. I mean, yes. I would even still go back to the Temptations.
Really?
Because, yeah, absolutely. When you're Otis Williams and you've been around as a successful artist for 60 years, they know what it means. Also they went through the Berry Gordy system. So it's not just, we think we're the best. They take care of their crew. They take care of their fans. They will wait, for hours afterwards to sign autographs and things like that. So it's seeing the appreciation that they have for the life that music has given them and how nice they are to everyone that works with them, because
they're pro at it.
They're absolutely.
Really, yes.
Absolutely.
It's in the blood, huh? You could see like a real true artist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amazing. You work with talent with large production companies like Grammy Special Merit Awards.
Yeah.
What was your favorite, I would say, memories or challenges? Managing the talent. Yeah.
Well, the thing with the Special Merit Awards is that a lot of it is given sort of posthumously to the estates of artists and songs and things like that we all love, but that maybe aren't here anymore. So if we're talking about something like a Sam and Dave, or a Prince, something like that, when you're dealing with estates, that is very different than dealing with a current live artist, because the current, the live artist is that personality they've always been, and they know exactly, and you can't really argue with that because it's the artist telling you what they want, right?
Yes.
But when you get into the aspect of a deceased artist and you're dealing with the estate, many times those are family members who, maybe were not that close to the artist, but maybe they didn't have children or they weren't married anymore. And so the estate fell to cousins, or maybe they did have children, but they have a lot of them and the children don't get along. And then, some of the children have one half and some of the children have the other half. So there's a lot, I think, that goes into not just understanding what it looks like to work with an artist themselves, but what it looks like to work with an IP, a group of, intellectual property, and then how to deal with all of the stakeholders involved in that. And especially when you're giving out an award to a posthumous estate, then there's a lot of politics that you have to kind of work with. So I would say that's probably one of the challenges that I remember, is, dealing with estates. But the benefit is that you always get to work with someone that maybe you idolized and loved. So, Earth, Wind and Fire, Bootsy Collins, I've mentioned Lisa Loeb before. That's the other fun part of sort of working with the Special Merit Awards, is that, again, similarly to catalog, these are folks that have been around for a while and they're really excited to continue to be celebrated in their career. And then
Amazing.
You get to work with them and fulfill your childhood dreams.
I think you fulfilled everybody's childhood dreams. You work with everybody. And touring is different. Managing one thing. Touring is literally hanging out with them, being their friend, going on a tour, seeing their happy moment, their sad moment, and their crazy moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, touring with Moby for years.
Yes, that was my next thing. Talking about how did you handle the chaos? That's another, please. Yes.
Luckily, by the time I started working with him, he was a little bit calmer on the chaos.
Yes.
But, obviously being a very big dance electronic artist, That comes with its own special situation where, if you're working with a band, particularly like we're talking about some of the older bands, that start time is 7, 8, 9 p.m. Maybe doors are at 5, openers at 6. So you as someone working on that crew know that your night is probably going to end around 9 or 10, right? Like you either load out or, if you're doing multi-day in the same venue, then, that's pretty easy out as soon as it's over. But when you work with DJs, your set, like the headlining time, that's the set time that everybody wants, is between midnight and 3 in the morning. And so, you absolutely might have an entire day of all the things you have to do on tour and the scheduling and the interviews and the promo and, everything you've got to do for that. And then you literally take a disco nap, right? And have to, kind of figure out a way to refresh because your work isn't truly going to start until midnight and your night truly isn't going to end until 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And then you have to, be ready to do it all over again the next day. And if you work with someone like Moby, he does both. He does both full band shows and he will do DJ shows. And so, one of the things that he tends to do is he'll set a full band tour. And then if there are, let's say, a few days off or a few holes here and there, he'll fill those with DJ sets. So if you're a party and you're me and you're, strictly with him the whole time, then if he doesn't have any days off, you don't have any days off.
How long you worked with him for? How long you were touring?
I was with him for almost 4 years. Wow. And it's super fun. I mean, there are days where you're like, okay, I woke up in Italy and then we flew to Serbia and now we're flying to Turkey and then we're going to be in, Brazil tomorrow.
Amazing.
It's pretty fun and pretty crazy. I mean, and so, I have a great story, like a really good memory of working with him. We did South by Southwest one year and we're walking around and we ran into Michael Stipe. And of course, one of the first things they do is start talking about how much they look like each other and how many times they've been mistaken for each other during that week. And then Mo introduces me and he's like, hey, this is my friend Michael. And Michael's like, hey, Shannon, how's it going? So, you're sitting there kind of in the back of your head being like, okay, just be cool. That's totally fine. Moby just introduced me to Michael Stipe. No big deal.
Amazing moments.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, touring can be super tough. And especially, I think, as you get older, things like, consistent nutrition, consistent exercise, consistent sleep, traveling constant different time zones. I remember for most of my 20s, was very, jet lag's not a thing. I thought I was so special. Like I can travel all over the world and it doesn't bother me. And then, I got to be about 33, 34. And then all of a sudden, coming back from Australia wasn't so fun, anymore.
Well, it's harder for somebody who lives in LA, West Coast, to adjust to anywhere in Europe or overseas for jet lag. East Coast is a little bit easier because there's about 3-hour difference. So you're talking about 9-hour difference when you travel anywhere to Europe or Far East.
I know. I know. I still do a lot of work in Europe, obviously dance electronic. And I'm going to London and Amsterdam for Amsterdam Dance Event in October. And I've already built in a couple of days on the front end to just acclimate. So I'm not wandering around jet lagged. So,
well, you're a pro at it now. Nobody can take that away from you. You're definitely pro.
That's right. But
Shannon,
touring is super fun.
Yes, it is indeed. Shannon, let's talk about you being part of growing the pop and dance electronic categories at the Grammys. Yeah. How did that came by and about, and how, this is pretty, when it happened, I remember it was a pretty important thing.
Yeah. So, I really loved that job. Like that was probably, if I had to rank my favorite gigs, that's probably one of them. The great thing about the Grammys is that it has so many different facets of it. So Music Cares is a part of the Grammy umbrella. The Recording Academy is, actually a not-for-profit, which a lot of folks don't know. There's now an additional branch called Grammy Global Ventures. We also have Grammy Museum. We do Grammy Camp, which is, Grammy in the schools and helps young folks who are learning music and learning to songwrite and all of those things to kind of start to figure out how to do it on a professional level. So the overarching theme of the Grammys is not just, it's the big show and we give out awards, but it's actually the major trade body for the music industry as a whole. And so I think beyond the fact of, getting to really dive into the pop and the dance electronic worlds a little bit more in depth, on top of it, that the work that you're doing is giving back to the industry and it's helping musicians and it's something that people want to be involved in, right? Because even if you're not getting Grammy nominated, maybe I can help you connect with Music Cares and we can help you get some money if you broke your hand and you can't play guitar and you're a touring guitarist, right? And so now we're helping you with that. So on one hand, it's the good giving back side of it. And then on the other hand, it's the work that I was doing with pop and dance electronic, which was really looking at the categories, seeing if they were consistent with what was being put out, if what we were nominating and what was winning was consistent with what those genres felt like were the best of their genre for that year. And I think for pop, it's, a little bit more mainstream, like folks understand it a little bit more. It is more in line with kind of what's the Billboard Top 100. Other than the traditional pop category, the three main pop categories themselves are not that much work and they get over 1,000 entries a category every year. So very healthy. But when it came to dance electronic, dance electronic has a culture around it. As we all know, it came from marginalized communities and, in the 70s and 80s, Chicago and Detroit. Anybody who knows about Plur and the true history of dance. And then also we're obviously talking, European dance culture and trance and things like that. So it's not just a genre of music the way pop is just a genre of music and everybody loves it and you go to shows and that's great. But there are things to be considered. And also, I think a lot of folks don't know that within the dance electronic space, like the umbrella as a whole, there are over 250 subgenres. So
I was just going to say that there's so many subgenres. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. So it's impossible, obviously, to reward all of them. But within the scope of wanting to award some demographic variance, some geographic variance, some subgenre variance, the idea that if someone looked at the 2001 Best Dance album or Best Dance electronic recording, I think that was the Baha Men Who Let the Dogs Out. Which that's not 20 years later representative of what was the best dance electronic, considering that Moby was up for an award that year, right? Like
to me, that was more I would say commercialized. They call it the commercialized dance music. That's how I started myself in the business years ago when I started my house label. They call it house music.
I love house. It's my favorite.
Yes,
I love house.
And house, you got deep house, then you got garage, and you got Chicago house, and you got Detroit house, you got New York sound.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, so from the standpoint of recognizing that every year we're not going to make everyone happy, but you still want drum and bass to feel represented. You still want trance to feel represented. You still want Moombahton to feel represented. And so I think what, my main job is coming in as someone who was part of the community, who loves the genre, who knows the players, to come in and say, okay, are we as the Grammys getting it right? And if we're not, then how do we reach out to those folks who are players, and who can help? How do we reach out to them and make this better? And so part of the way that we did that is, we have committees that I know a lot of people, feel a certain way about, but for screening committees, all these folks do is they just look at what's come in for that year for all the entries. And then they say, would we as a genre, would we as a community agree that this is representative of us. So if it lands more on the pop side of something and it happens to have a 4 on the floor beat, do we think that is dance electronic, or do we call that a pop record, right? And so bringing folks in who have that level of expertise to really be able to shape what is reflective of dance electronic culture.
Who would you vote in, like label owners or DJs, to be
I
part
mean,
of it?
yeah, I can't. We both, all of those things.
Okay.
I mean,
you don't have to mention names.
Yeah,
That's all right. Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, artists for sure, because we want to make sure that we're representing a good sector of that. And, and we're making sure that we're bringing in women of color. We're making sure that we're bringing in, global majority folks. We want to make sure that if we're thinking about, a Duke Dumont, that we're also thinking about a Peggy Gou. So we're making sure that we're paying attention to everybody that's out there. But yeah, some of it could be label heads, some of it could be heads of A&R, some of it could be like we're talking about artists, songwriters, anyone who really has spent, like top line vocalists, anyone who has truly spent their career in dance electronic culture, then that would be someone that we would reach out to and say, hey, please.
Most of them DJs and remixes, and the remixes are DJs. Yes,
absolutely. Well, and the Grammys have a remix category, which wasn't part of my remit, but the remix itself, because we don't consider it just dance, because you could remix any genre. But that is what's considered a craft category. And in the craft category, you have to be someone who does that craft in order to be a part of it. So only remixers are able to participate in the remix category and to kind of be on that committee and work with it. So, I think the lesson for a lot of folks is, historically, I know everyone's like, oh, it's just a popularity contest. And I mean, listen, part of popularity, and mainstream popularity is people knowing who you are and enjoying your music. So yes, there is a level of success you have to have. But if we look at, an Esperanza Spalding, a Jada G, a Camel Fat and Elderbrook, Kate Trinata, like these folks all have major recordings, but they're not the most famous. They're not a David Guetta, who also gets nominated, Diplo, who also gets nominated. But we definitely, with Toki Monster, all the diversity that we had over the last, I think, probably 10 years, that's what we were really trying to do, is hit home with those categories. And then just to kind of wrap it up, the other thing that we did, not to forget pop, is there's a category called traditional pop. And traditional pop has meant the Great American Songbook. So that is historically like musicals and cabaret, something that's going to be at Feinstein's 54. So all of that
That's
stuff.
considered pop? That is considered pop?
Well, because it was popular music from the 20s to the 50s. Right?
Got it. Yes,
so, and the Grammys started in the 50s. So that's why we call it traditional pop, right? And that also kind of fits in the category of holiday music. So like a Christmas album, because traditionally a lot of those tracks were popular. But obviously that's falling off the radar. Nobody is listening to Tony Bennett, on like a regular basis anymore. And, bless his soul. Absolutely. He won that. I think he won a couple of years ago with Lady Gaga, right? And he was one of the most winning artists in that category. Every time Tony Bennett entered, he pretty much won. But the man has a niche, so that's great.
Absolutely.
But we started expanding it because we realized this as a category is not going to survive if we continue to keep it so pigeonholed. And so when we started to look at, okay, what is the Great American Songbook from a modern perspective? So then you start to think about American artists who have really contributed to the culture. So that is, anybody from Motown, right? So Smokey Robinson, again, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Tammy Terrell, Nina Simone, not that she's Motown, but, as someone who, if you're singing Strange Fruit, that is a particularly American song. So we would say the ancestors of the current traditional pop are the Great American Songbook, but who are we calling traditional pop now? And so we started to expand it. And then as we did that, we saw just an influx of entries because this was a category that was not healthy as we would have defined it. But as we expanded it, then we would get things like Lettucey singing Nina Simone, right? And then that got nominated. And Lettucey is historically known as a jazz artist. But as soon as she started to sing Nina Simone, then it was, okay, this is what what we absolutely now in modern times are considering traditional American pop. So she got nominated. We're very excited. So yeah, so that's in answer to your how did I grow the categories.
Wow.
That's how you do
Wow.
it.
Amazing. I would write a book about it, actually. Shannon, what was, I mean, I'm sure there's so many rewarding things working at the Grammys. I don't know if it's a fair question. Just give
Yeah.
us one of the most rewarding aspects working. Just, I know you could probably have a whole list. Just give us one at least.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, basically everything I kind of just mentioned, but within dance electronics specifically, over the last couple of years, I have
Yes.
helped to be a part of the creation of 2 new categories, and also to help top line vocalists get a little bit more recognition within
Yes.
dance electronic. Because what you see is that percentage of DJs and engineers and producers are mostly male, and so the way that outside of a Jada G or or a Blessed Madonna, or a Toki Monster, outside of like some of the women that we've talked about who are currently, very big in the space,
Hmm.
it is usually top line vocals where women are the most prominent. And so if you look at historically what we considered someone who was available for a nomination, when you're looking at a dance electronic category, it's the artist is a nominee, the producer is a nominee, the engineers and the mixers. And so if those are all male and we're not giving credit to a top line vocalist, when Diplo makes an album, right, or when Diplo makes a track, he's absolutely putting on a top line vocalist. And most of the time it's going to be a woman. And if she's not getting credit and being nominated the same way everybody else who made that track is,
Yeah.
then obviously that's, an inequality that we want rectified.
Correct.
So
Correct.
this past year, we added top line vocalists to the list of folks who would get nominated in
Wow.
those categories. And we
Amazing.
also, I'm super excited about it. I think it's going to make a real difference this year. And we also were able to split the recording category into 2 and add a new one. And so now we have best pop dance recording along with
Wow.
best dance electronic. So now you don't have, let's say the Kylie Minogues versus the John Hopkins, right? Because those are
Yes.
2 separate things. You can't really compare them, but they were living in the same world as far as the Grammys were concerned. So now we've able to do that. We've given both categories a little bit of breathing room. And so, to be able to have a major hand in that and to say, I did that, and that's going to be a legacy that's going to live on past my time, I think is really exciting.
You got plenty of time. Plenty of time. You're gonna see so many changes in the music business, and you're gonna still be part of it. That changes. Yes.
I know.
Yes.
And
It's
now,
moving.
aren't we?
It's moving fast. It is moving. We're gonna talk about that
Very
in a minute.
fast.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, how did it all came about? Working for Steve Aoki, and
Yeah,
becoming part of the camp. I mean, you
totally.
played an important role there. Please.
Yeah, well, and as we mentioned through kind of my outreach in the
Yes.
dance electronic world, I became friends with Steve Aoki's manager. His name's Matt Cologne. He's fabulous, and he kind of came to me and said, "Hey, we're starting this Web3 fan engagement program. Would you be interested in running it for us?" And I had said, "Oh, I don't know anything about Web3, And he said, "Yeah, nobody does. It's brand new, but." From the aspect of what we're actually building is a fan community, you have all of that experience. You know how to work with artists, you know how to work with fans, you are a fan, you know how to do member services, because again, the Grammys is a member services industry, right? You know how to do, produce events. So essentially everything that you are building as an artist when you do a D2C fan engagement community, however you choose to do it, whether you call it a fan club or you start to call it, all of these fan engagement super fan platforms that we're seeing, start to proliferate in the industry right now. That's what they're all trying to get back to. They're all essentially trying to get back to D2C connection from the artist to the fan, outside of the middlemen of labels and third-party platforms and social media and everything that kind of has been put in the middle, where historically, as an artist, you would put out your music and the label helped you do that. And then
Yes.
you would travel and you would connect with your fan directly, and any money you made off of merch or ticket sales, minus the promoter, obviously, you got. And that was the whole point of having a fan base and a fan club, is for you to have that information and connect with those folks and have them feel like they knew who you were and that you were an intrinsic part of their personality and the music that you released, right? So, I mean, I hate to break it to all these tech kids, but that's like everything old is new again. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just using new tools to do it, right?
Yes, new tools to do it, yes.
So when Matt put it to me that way, I was like, oh, okay, no problem. I can do that. So I did. I went over and learned a lot about Web3 really fast. It was definitely a boot camp, like, okay, what's a MetaMask and what's Ethereum? And I had some Bitcoin, but what do I do with it? So, what's an NFT? So to learn all of that, and then learn what it could do and how it could help the industry. And even if the industry wasn't ready for it, or even if the format in which it currently exists isn't something that the industry was willing to adopt, we are going to get there. Web3 is changing, and the tools it is creating are changing in a way that are starting to, I think, interact with the music industry in a much more positive way. People are understanding that, okay, the same way when Web 2 came up, it was really hard to understand how to get to a website. And now intrinsically, everyone's like, oh yeah, of course I online bank. What do you mean writing a check? So we're going to get there with Web3 and everything. But to be able to do that for an artist as well known as Steve, and to have him be the first one out of the gate, I think we got a lot of press off of that. And the great thing about Steve is that he's never afraid to try anything new, because he's not afraid of failure. And so if you come up with a good idea and it makes sense, they're happy to do it. And if it fails, that's fine, but we tried it and we learned something. And then he takes those learnings and then applies it to the next thing that he does, which is, I think, why he's successful. It's the both of, well, I'm not afraid to try something, and if it succeeds, fantastic. But if it doesn't, that's fine, because I learned something, and that knowledge is going to help me make the next thing succeed. So to have that kind of freedom to do, kind of whatever you wanted within the scope of how do we make this a better fan experience, was really exciting, because Steve never says no. So he's just like, yeah, if you think it's a great idea, let's try it. And you're like, okay.
Amazing. Let's talk about the tech, the music tech right now. This word is now becoming part of the music business. I mean, the music tech world, the music tech business, and how all this emerging technology, helping indie musicians. To me, technology always been the driving vehicle of the music business. I owned studios before. I know what it is, how fast, vocal synthesizers sounds like a robot to me. So it's not like it's the first time we use it.
Right.
There's AI coming and robotic, and we've been always samplers,
Exactly.
All the, the modules, all these modules with all these drum sounds. Nobody has a live band. I had a studio back in the day, when we used to produce music for my own label, and there was no live band. Okay, we needed a guitar player used to come in, or somebody. That's it. But everything else was all in the modules. Yeah. Everything you needed, whether it's a drum, it's a piano, it's a key, it's a riff, whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so they made a little big deal out of it, but to me, nothing changed. People still want to relate to artists. Yes. Yeah, there is new tools and advancement going to come. You're going to make music. It's going to make music on its own by learning, but that's going to happen. That's part of it. Yeah. We embrace it, but let's use these tools to enhance. Let's talk about that, and talk about also, as you see, there's a flux of a lot of new platforms coming up. Also, a lot of new entrepreneurs and people who've been in the business like yourself, who started a lot of these engagement platforms. So we get the tech aspect and the engagement aspect of it. And also we notice a lot of artists also want to be more independent. There's a new path I would see right now in the music industry. More and more artists want to be independent. Yeah. And some of it has to do with the available tools and the availability of independent marketing and availability of this and that. Exactly. Let's for somebody like you, I'll definitely want to get your opinion, all of that, just because you've been around the game. You've been around the business for longer. You are, to me, obviously, and I never talked to you before. I just read your profile. you literally an encyclopedia. I mean, what you've been through, and your journey so far. I would say an encyclopedia of the music business. So please,
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I
yes,
mean, me and listen, it's my favorite. It's my favorite thing, right?
I
I'm
see you're
definitely.
shining. You're shining. You talk about what are you doing, what are you done. You're glowing, literally
It's
glowing.
I know, right? It's
Yeah,
literally, I mean, when I was a kid,
yeah,
I was the nerd that sat in my room and read liner notes because I wanted to know who was doing
yes,
everything and how I could, get there. And I'll never forget the first time I met Jeff Emmerich, who, was one of the Beatles engineers, and he was walking down the hall and like he had gone to have a meeting with somebody at the producers and engineers wing, and I popped my head out of my office and I was like, wait, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but are you Jeff Emmerich? And he was like, I am? How, and he's very British. So of course he was like, well, how did you know that? And I was like, so I'm a big music nerd and I used to read all the liner notes and oh my God, you engineered all of my favorite songs, And he was like, and so it turned into this amazing conversation because he was just so happy that like someone my age, was coming out and was recognizing his work and knew who he was and was able to stop and have like a true music fan conversation with him. So
interesting.
that, so that's one of my other favorite memories of the Grammys,
Yes.
but you're absolutely right? There's a music store here in LA called Amoeba. And one of the bumper stickers that they sell is drum. It's very plain. And it just says drum machines have no soul. Right. And it makes me laugh every time because like you were talking about, samplers and 808s and, all the things, right? Casio keyboards. I mean, the thing about music is people make it because they're artists and they have to. And it's a way to say something that maybe they can't say in another way, or they can't get out emotions in another way. And so they do this. And then those of us that listen to it, maybe we have these thoughts, but we think, does anybody else feel the way that I do? And then you hear a song and you just relate to it so much that now someone has spoken for you, right? And then you build a community around other people who love an artist as much as you do, because now you know that all of these people feel the same way and have those same emotions that you do. And so I think even with all of, just like you're saying, all of the technological updates that we're having that are coming at us so fast, they're going to change the way that the industry functions and the methodology by which music is made, the methodology by which music is distributed, marketed, delivered, listened to, all of those things. But what we're specifically finding, I think, with Gen Z and Alpha is because they are so digital first,
Yeah.
they are now looking for the things that we all as older generations took for granted. That's why vinyl is selling so much more now than it was when we switched to digital, because my generation had vinyl and that was old hat and we didn't want that anymore. We went from vinyl to CD, and then look what we can do. I don't have to walk around with a giant CD binder anymore. I can just listen to anything I want on my phone. Isn't this amazing? But we lost that intrinsic connection to the music itself and the artists when all we had to do was click a little like button, right? And now the kids have grown up with, oh, all I have to do is click a little like button. But I want to know more about that artist. I want to connect with the other people who love that artist the way I do. So we're seeing a resurgence in live. We're seeing things like Discord be used. Fred, again, is an amazing example of someone who is using community tech tools and emerging tools to build live shows that people haven't seen in forever. And he is doing amazing community work, where he will just pop up and say, hey guys, I'm going to be in, Primrose Hill Park in an hour, and I'm going to be playing some tracks from my new album. Come out if you want. Right. And I think he even did like a bike ride through London and said, hey, hop on your bike and ride with me through London. And I'm going to have a boombox and we're going to play some tracks from my new album. Like, that's not for everybody. I totally get it. Not every artist wants to like be that in real life with their fans, for sure. But if you can, the amount of fan loyalty he's building, we talk about catalog and how you build a sustainable career. And that's what keeps the lights on for both an artist and a record label, is the ability to continue to keep mining something decades after its original release. And we're losing that right now. We're not building that with some of these younger artists, because we're looking at TikTok, we're finding a one-hit wonder. We're not doing artist development anymore. We're not building them up. We're expecting them to go from their bedroom to Glastonbury with no middle ground. So we're not building them up as artists, and we're also not building up their fan bases either, which is why grassroots venues are starting to disappear. But all of that rant is to say there are still artists who are doing the organic fan base growth, and we see how sticky that is for younger generations. So, everything's a cycle. I think we're coming back to a cycle that looks very much like what we grew up with. And I'm excited because since I also do live, I think this is amazing. I think we're going to start to see a meld of a lot of these fan engagement tools. And there's so many of them out there, like Grouper and Sound and Chorus and Campaign and, Medallion, Planet. But really what it is trying to give the ownership of that fan connection back to the artist, as opposed to, if the algorithm changes on Instagram and that's where your 3 million followers are, what do you have to do to try and do that again? And in the meantime, those followers are being fed ads and not you. So how do you take that fan base and give it back to the artist so that what those fans are actually being fed is what you as the artist want to give them? And then those fans are much more willing to give you directly more of their dollars. Because if they're giving $15 to Spotify and you get 0.00, whatever cents of it,
yes,
the fan would much rather pay $15 to you to buy a piece of merch that they know you're going to get $13 out of. It's $15 out of the fan's pocket either way. So the other thing artists up and coming artists should really think about is from the beginning, owning that fan connection, building it organically, playing out, developing your craft. When people come to me and say, well, I don't have any fans, how do I use these tools? I'm like, the problem is you don't have any fans. Is your song good? Are you a good artist? Have you honed your craft? Do people want to listen to you? Like, the idea of music is an art form that takes years to cultivate, people have forgotten, and they just want to use AI and then be like, look, I created a song, now I should make millions of dollars. So, that's the only thing I would say is that these tech tools are not going to make you a star unless you put in the work. And you've got to connect with your fans. And that's where these start to help you. You don't have to have a connection to a major label to release a tune. You can do it via TuneCore. You can do it via CD Baby. You can own all your masters. You can go to United Masters and get your publishing through them. And you can still own the master rights for that, which you absolutely should. You can use Chorus or Campaign as a fan engagement tool, and you can connect with those fans and you can build an email base and you can tell them, when you're playing, where you're playing, and you can connect with Shopify and build your own merch store. And then you can make money off of that. So it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work that used to be done by the label. But if you've ever seen the TLC behind the music, the label also takes a big chunk of that money. So, I don't know if anybody's ever seen Lisa Left Eye Lopez break down why TLC was broke, even after they had sold millions upon millions of copies of albums. That was probably one of the most informative behind the music clips I have ever seen.
Or more like awakening moment. I would say, for artists, yes.
I was in college and loved TLC and watched it and was like, holy shit, that's okay. I guess I need to work in the music industry so I can figure out how to help artists make more of the money that belongs to them.
Yes, absolutely. Shannon, I have an interesting question to you following what we just talked about, with nostalgia festivals growing in popularity and catalog tracks now being the majority of streamed music on all the DSPs, the digital streaming platforms. Are we really building artists today who will be tomorrow's legacy stars? For the future, yeah.
I mean, I think some like Billie Eilish is a great one who comes to mind because she's been so thoughtful about what she does, and she and her brother are a very unique case, obviously. Growing up in LA, having artistic parents, and starting at such a young age. But she's also branched out a lot. So when you look at her doing, a track for the Barbie movie, And and doing all of, like, I think she might even be close. I think the only one she's maybe missing is a Tony at this point. So she's what, 23, 24, and already close to an EGOT. Because she's been really thoughtful about how she's approached her career. Now, what was also really smart is she connected with all of her fans early, as we've been talking about, but she also was very particular about what her image looked like. And so the baggy clothing, right, from such a young age was protecting her mental health from not being seen as an object the way that so many young women who get into the industry are seen as, right? And she was very conscious of, I want the focus to be on my music and on my talent, and not on me as, like, not as a woman, and what do I look like, and, please talk about my body. Like, very much just like, talk about my music.
Yeah.
And so I think that was really smart. And so she is building a fan base and a career and a scope of work that is going to take her, I think, really far. But she also, to be fair, is one of the people who has broken through our current lack of monoculture, which is something that I think we're seeing with the resurgence of these nostalgia fests. I'm actually working on executive producing a 90s festival. And so some of should be super fun. Some of the conversations that we've had is exactly that, is this idea that because people now spend their money in much more specific ways, that the idea of a festival where they maybe don't like everybody or aren't sure who everyone is, and they think they're going to maybe like 50% of the music that's out there, isn't as attractive as it is now to say, oh, I know I'm going to like everyone in this bill, or I'm at least going to enjoy myself, and it's going to, give me an experience that I'm going to feel good about. And so I'm going to go to that. And I think also for some of the folks who are my age and we lived through the 90s the first time, if you've got kids who were born in the 90s or born a little bit after the 90s, and they're nostalgic for the 90s the way I was nostalgic for the 60s and 70s, right? Like I said, my first concert was the Rolling Stones, because the Rolling Stones are one of my dad's favorite bands. And so I was listening to it growing up because that's what he was playing. And then he knew I loved music. And so then when they came through, Denver, 1993, Voodoo Lounge Tour, my dad was like, surprise, I got his tickets, right? So that's how we envision people doing this currently for the 90s stuff with their kids. Now, my concern is what happens when we run out of that monoculture. If everything now is so tailored and so like Spotify, this is what you listen to and this is what you listen to, and, but they're not meeting in the middle, then we're really relying on, I think, younger kids who are into music. And again, we start to get back into that idea of these fan communities, right? We are starting to see more curators. So the way we used to look at radio DJs, where they would pick something and they'd say, like, I really like this, like Murray the K, right? He's the guy who broke the Beatles in Chicago because he had the power to do that, because he was the guy who DJ'd the most prominent time slot in the top Chicago radio station. We don't really see that anymore. So what we're starting to see now is that Gen Z and Alpha are building that themselves via influencers on TikTok, influencers on blogs or on Discord, things like that. And so kids are starting to say, well, we want to recreate that. So I'm excited about that. But I do think we need to see a return to some version of a mainstream monoculture, because otherwise all of these niche markets are only going to allow folks to build a niche career. But that's not what a label can sustain itself on 20 years from now. That's not what an estate can sustain itself on 20 years from now. So if you as an artist want to graduate from playing the El Rey to playing the Wiltern to playing, the Shrine, which is a 5,000 person venue, to graduate to Staples Center, then you've got to build that whole community. Otherwise, if we're just building a niche community, you're going to be 60 still playing the El Rey. And that's a hard slog.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for all of this. This is pretty amazing. Very insightful. I'm serious. I feel much smarter today after this interview. I get so much knowledge.
Well, thanks. That's what I'm here for.
Yes, Shannon, really great. A quick couple of things. What is the best advice you would give someone starting out in the music industry?
Yeah. I absolutely still tell this to students when I speak at colleges now, is I say some of the best advice that was ever given to me, I think is still true today, which is if you can do something else, if you have an interest or you can do anything else, you should do something else.
Yes.
Because this is a business that is really tough.
Yes.
And it changes, as you said, Bob, it changes all the time. It's full of egotistical folks. It's full of, struggles on all sides. And it doesn't mean that the people who work the hardest make it to the top. It doesn't mean the person who has the most talent makes it to the top. It's not fair. Yeah. So if you're me and you know that this is the only thing in the world that you want to do and that you're willing to go through that struggle to do, then welcome. We're here for you. This is your community. We will fight with you through it. And I will help, lift up I do a lot of mentoring because I want to help lift up the younger generation. So I'm here to help. But if your heart is not in it, this is not going to be for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a long term. Absolutely. Shannon, before we wrap it up, anything that you want to mention that's coming up that you're working on, or so part of your platform, or part of what are you doing for our viewers and listeners and your followers to kind of look for? It's like, yes, Shannon coming up with so-and-so next month or so, or this year.
I'm going to be moderating a panel on streaming fraud at Amsterdam Dance Event. And I'm super excited. Two of my favorite guys are going to be on the panel. Andy Daniel, he's the director of A&R now at Defected. And he's a lovely human being. And Andrew Beatty, he's one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of BeatDap. And they are
amazing guy. Yeah. I had him on the show. Really amazing.
Love. Yes.
Andrew's amazing. Yes.
He's a good friend of mine as well. Yes. So I actually just talked to him on Tuesday. And then there's another gentleman, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm forgetting his name because I haven't met him yet, but I'm sure he's lovely as well. And so we're gonna do a great panel on that, and I'm so excited for ADE. And then I will also be moderating a panel on artists and how they can affect global change at Sim Sao Paulo in Sao Paulo, Brazil, at the beginning of December. And I'm, like I said, I won't give too many details away because we're still in the early stages, but look out for a 90s festival in 2025, 2026. And, and I'm available for consulting.
Busy bee. Yes, Shannon. My God. Amazing. Kudos to you. Shannon, I really want to thank you for this interesting, inspiring, and extremely, extremely insightful in the music business. I've been in the music business for 30 years. But again, you know what? You have double on me. You doubled on me for sure. Yes, yes. I want to say thank you for joining us today. This concludes today's episode of Soundbreaker. Please make sure to follow us on socials and stay tuned for new episodes. Thanks
so much, Bob. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share the Soundbreaker podcast. And if you are joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.